Welcome to the channel where we dive into the most intense and thrilling stories of survival and courage. In today's gripping tale, we're about to witness an extraordinary struggle of human perseverance in the face of an unstoppable threat. Get ready for a suspenseful ride through a world ravaged by the relentless onslaught of the undead. Before we jump into this heart-pounding story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell icon so you never miss another exciting story that could change the way you think about survival, strength, and determination. We're here to inspire, motivate, and entertain with every video. Let's get started. In the quiet outskirts of a crumbling city, humanity's worst nightmare had come to life. The virus had spread faster than anyone could have imagined. It had turned ordinary people into the undead, with one singular instinct: to hunt down the living. Now, all that was left were pockets of survivors desperately fighting to stay alive, clinging to the hope that somewhere out there, a safe haven might exist. Among them was a young man named Ethan. His world had once been filled with normal struggles, work, family, and dreams of a future. But all of that had been wiped away in a matter of weeks when the zombie outbreak hit. The city he once called home was now a graveyard, overrun by the feral creatures that used to be its inhabitants. Ethan had learned early on that survival wasn't just about finding food or avoiding zombies. It was about holding on to something, anything, that gave him the strength to keep moving. He had witnessed the fall of his friends, his family, and countless others who had tried to survive only to be consumed by the chaos. Today, Ethan was part of a small group of survivors holed up in an abandoned apartment building, fortified as best they could against the constant threat of the undead. The walls of their makeshift refuge were lined with makeshift weapons, broken pipes, wooden planks, and a few guns that had been salvaged from the wreckage of the old world. Every day was a fight, and every night was a prayer for tomorrow. As the sun dipped behind the horizon, the usual eerie silence of the city was broken by the unmistakable moan of the undead. The zombies were near. Ethan and his group had been hearing them for hours, the low growls that echoed from the darkened streets, a constant reminder that they were never truly safe. Tonight, though, something felt different. The zombies weren't just wandering aimlessly. They were getting closer, faster, and there were more of them. The survivors had been scavenging in the nearby ruins during the day, hoping to find supplies that would get them through the next few days. But now, they were trapped in the building, with no way out and only the dim light of their makeshift lanterns to guide them. Ethan could feel his heart racing as he crept to the window, peering out through a crack in the boarded-up frame. What he saw made his stomach drop. The streets below were teeming with zombies. They weren't just stumbling through the streets, they were organized, moving with an eerie, coordinated precision. A shiver ran down his spine. It was as if the zombies were hunting in packs, something far more dangerous than the aimless hordes they had encountered in the past. This was no random gathering. It was an attack. Turning quickly, Ethan raced to the center of the room, where the others were preparing for the worst. There was no time to waste. "We're not alone," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They're coming for us, and they're coming fast." The group immediately began to scramble, grabbing whatever they could to defend themselves. One of the women, Maria, clutched a metal rod in her hand, her eyes wide with fear but filled with determination. The others were equally tense, moving with a sense of urgency that only came from the understanding that their survival depended on it. Ethan quickly mapped out a plan. There were two exits, the main door, which was already barricaded, and a fire escape at the back. But the fire escape wasn't exactly a secure route. The zombies would likely be swarming the area, and the narrow stairwell offered little protection. But it was their only chance. "We'll split into two groups," Ethan instructed. "Maria, you take the back with two others. Get to the fire escape, and we'll meet at the alleyway. The rest of us will hold the front." The group nodded, each person aware that this could be their final stand. They didn't have much time. As the moans grew louder, echoing through the building's cracked walls, Ethan knew they had no choice but to fight or die. With a final glance at his companions, Ethan moved to the front door, where he and two others began reinforcing the barricades. The sound of zombies clawing at the walls outside grew louder, and the tension in the room reached its peak. But then, just as they thought the worst was upon them, a sudden crash came from the rear of the building. The fire escape had been breached. The fight for survival had just begun. "You said?" Ethan spun around at the sound of the crash, his instincts screaming that they were running out of time. Without hesitation he motioned for the group to move faster. Maria and the others rushed toward the back door, but the moment they flung it open a wave of cold terror washed over them. The fire escape was already crawling with zombies, their grotesque forms illuminated by the flickering light of the city's dying power grid. The group froze for a split second, and in that moment chaos erupted. Maria swung her metal rod with fierce desperation, knocking a zombie back down the stairs. Ethan shouted for everyone to regroup, pulling them away from the compromised exit. There was no choice now, they would have to hold their ground inside the building. The barricades at the front door shuddered violently as the zombies outside threw their weight against it, splintering the wood and groaning with an otherworldly hunger. Ethan glanced around the room, searching for anything that could strengthen their defenses, but there was nothing left to use. They would have to fight with what they had. "Hold them off as long as you can," Ethan barked, forming a line with the others, their makeshift weapons gripped tightly in trembling hands. The first zombie burst through the door, its decayed body forcing its way through the wreckage. Ethan swung his bat with all his strength, the impact sending the creature sprawling backward, but more followed right behind it. The room became a battlefield, the survivors fighting desperately against the endless wave of the undead. Every swing, every shove, every scream echoed through the building, a symphony of survival and terror. Ethan felt his muscles burning, his arms aching, but he refused to give in. Maria fought beside him, her face a mask of grim determination. Every time a zombie got too close she drove her rod into its skull with precision and fury, yet for every one they knocked down, two more seemed to take its place. Ethan knew they couldn't keep this up for long, they needed another plan, something to buy them time to escape. His mind raced through possibilities until his eyes landed on a forgotten propane tank in the corner of the room. An idea sparked, desperate and dangerous, but it might be their only hope. "Cover me," he shouted to Maria as he sprinted toward the tank, dodging the grasping hands of the undead. He grabbed the tank, dragging it toward the center of the room, then fumbled through his pockets for the lighter he always carried. Maria's eyes widened as she realized what he was planning. She yelled for the others to fall back, pushing them toward the rear of the building as Ethan worked frantically to ignite the tank. Come on," he muttered under his breath, his fingers slick with sweat. Finally a small flame burst to life. He touched it to the tank's valve and then ran like hell. The explosion rocked the building, a deafening roar that sent shockwaves through the crumbling walls. Flames engulfed the front room, incinerating dozens of zombies in an instant, but the force of the blast also collapsed part of the ceiling, cutting off their only escape route through the main hall. Ethan coughed through the smoke, struggling to see through the haze. He spotted Maria and the others huddled near the back wall, their faces streaked with soot, but alive. They had survived the blast, now they just needed a way out. "The fire escape is gone," Ethan rasped, thinking fast, "but maybe we can get to the roof. If we can make it to the roof we might be able to jump to the next building." It was a risky plan. The gap between the buildings was wide and the roof unstable, but there was no time to debate it. The fire was spreading fast and the surviving zombies were already pushing through the debris. Without waiting for an answer, Ethan led the charge up the stairwell, their footsteps pounding against the metal steps as they ascended. The building groaned and creaked under the strain of the fire, threatening to collapse at any moment. When they burst onto the rooftop, the night air hit them like a slap in the face, but it was a relief after the suffocating smoke. Ethan scanned the rooftops ahead and spotted the neighboring building. It was close, but not close enough to guarantee a safe jump. "We have no choice," Ethan said, turning to the group one by one. They nodded, fear flashing in their eyes but resolve hardening their faces. They had survived this long and they would not give up now. Maria volunteered to go first. She took a few steps back, then sprinted forward, leaping across the gap. Her body sailed through the air for a heart-stopping moment before she landed hard on the other side, rolling to absorb the impact. She got up quickly, waving them on. One by one the others made the jump, some stumbling on the landing but all of them making it safely. Ethan went last, his heart hammering in his chest. He pushed off the rooftop, soaring over the abyss below and crashing onto the opposite building with a grunt. They were safe for now, but Ethan knew the fight was far from over as they caught their breath and looked out over the cityscape. The truth was clear, the zombies were evolving, they were learning, and they would not stop until every last human was gone. And so the survivors pressed on into the night, determined to find a way to fight back against the endless darkness that threatened to consume them all. The group huddled together on the rooftop, their breaths heavy, their bodies trembling from exhaustion and fear. Below them the city was a living nightmare. The streets swarmed with the undead and the air was thick with the sounds of distant screams and the low guttural moans that never seemed to end. Ethan wiped the sweat and soot from his brow, forcing himself to focus. There was no time to rest. If they stayed in one place too long the zombies would find them. "We need to move," he said, his voice rough from the smoke and strain. "We head north, maybe find higher ground or a better shelter." Maria nodded, glancing nervously at the dark skyline. They made their way carefully across the rooftops, the gaps between buildings narrowing as they moved toward the heart of the city. With every step Ethan felt the weight of responsibility grow heavier. He had to keep them alive no matter what. As they crossed another narrow alleyway, Ethan noticed movement on the street below, a different kind of movement among the zombies. They were not just wandering aimlessly anymore, they were gathering in large groups, forming strange patterns, almost like they were being guided by an unseen force. It was unsettling, unnatural. "Keep your eyes open," Ethan warned. "Something is not right." Hours passed as they moved cautiously across the rooftops. Every creak of metal or slip of a foot threatened to give them away. Eventually they found a relatively intact building, an old hospital abandoned when the outbreak began. It looked sturdy and defensible, and more importantly, it had resources they could use. They climbed down into the hospital through a broken window, their feet crunching over shattered glass. Inside, the air was stale, filled with the scent of decay and mildew. They moved silently through the corridors, scavenging for supplies and checking for any lurking dangers. In one of the rooms, Maria found a stash of medical supplies, bandages, antibiotics, and even a few bottles of clean water. It was a small victory, but in this world small victories meant everything. They set up a temporary camp in the hospital cafeteria, using overturned tables and chairs to create a defensive barrier. For the first time in days, they allowed themselves to breathe a little easier. As the night deepened and the survivors took turns keeping watch, Ethan sat near one of the shattered windows, staring out at the ruined city, his mind racing with questions and fears. He could not shake the feeling that the zombies were changing, adapting, and he knew that whatever was coming next would be worse than anything they had faced before. Suddenly a low rumble shook the building, dust falling from the cracked ceiling. Ethan jumped to his feet, the others stirred, awake, eyes wide with alarm. Another rumble, louder this time, and then a deafening roar. Maria rushed to the window, her face going pale with horror. Ethan joined her, and what he saw made his blood run cold. In the distance a massive horde was moving toward them, not just a random collection of zombies but an organized army, thousands strong, led by grotesque mutated creatures larger and more terrifying than anything they had encountered. These new monsters moved with a horrifying intelligence, coordinating the horde with brutal efficiency. "We need to leave now," Ethan said, grabbing his pack and motioning for the others to move. "But where?" Maria asked, panic creeping into her voice. "They will tear us apart out there." Ethan scanned the building, his mind working frantically. "We go underground," he decided. "The hospital has a service tunnel system. It might connect to the subway. We can use it to escape." It was a desperate plan, but desperation was all they had left. They hurried through the hospital, searching for the entrance to the service tunnels, all the while the roar of the approaching horde growing louder, shaking the very walls of their fragile refuge. They found the tunnel entrance behind a rusted steel door in the basement. Ethan pried it open, revealing a dark, narrow passage that seemed to stretch endlessly into the blackness. Without hesitation they slipped inside, pulling the door closed behind them just as the first of the mutated creatures smashed into the building above. The tunnels were pitch black and the air was thick and suffocating. Ethan led the way, his small flashlight cutting a feeble path through the darkness. Every step echoed around them, making it feel like they were being followed. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had lost all meaning in the oppressive dark, but eventually they reached an old subway platform, deserted and silent except for the distant sound of dripping water. Relief washed over them briefly until they heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps, not shuffling, dragging footsteps but deliberate, measured ones. Someone or something was down here with them. Ethan signaled for silence and they crouched behind a rusted column, peering into the gloom. Slowly a figure emerged from the darkness, not a zombie but a human, at least at first glance. The man wore ragged clothes and his eyes were wild and sunken, but he moved with purpose and intelligence. He was armed, a shotgun slung across his back and a cruel-looking knife at his side. "Who are you?" Ethan called out carefully, not stepping out from cover yet. The man turned his head sharply, his mouth curling into a twisted smile. "Survivors," he said in a raspy voice. "Been a long time since I saw any of you alive." He approached slowly and Ethan stepped into the open, keeping his hands where the man could see them. "We are just looking for a safe place. We don't want trouble." The man laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "Safe place? There is no safe place, not anymore, only death and those who serve it." Before Ethan could react, the man lunged, pulling his knife free, and the dark tunnels exploded into violence again, the group thrown into another brutal fight for their lives against not only the undead but the madness of the living. The man's knife flashed in the dim light, a cruel arc cutting through the air as he lunged toward Ethan. The group scrambled back, trying to avoid the blade, but the narrowness of the tunnel made movement difficult. Ethan ducked just in time, the knife slicing the air inches above his head. Panic surged through him, but he pushed it aside. Survival was the only thing that mattered now. Maria screamed as the man lunged again, his knife aimed straight at her. Ethan's heart raced as he grabbed the nearest object, a broken metal rod, and swung it with everything he had, knocking the blade off course. The man stumbled back, momentarily disoriented. "Get away from her!" Ethan shouted, his voice raw with anger. The others scrambled to their feet, trying to form a defensive line. But the man was relentless, his movements quick and erratic, as if the world around him no longer held any meaning. His laughter echoed off the tunnel walls, a sound that sent a chill down Ethan's spine. He wasn't just a survivor, he was something far more dangerous. The madness in his eyes told Ethan everything he needed to know. This man had long since crossed the line between survival and insanity. Maria, still shaken, picked up a jagged piece of broken glass, her hands trembling as she steadied herself. She wasn't going to let him hurt anyone else. With a swift motion, she lunged toward the man, aiming for his exposed side. The glass cut deep into his flesh, and he let out a sharp gasp of pain. But the wound didn't slow him down. "You think you can stop me?" The man growled, his eyes wild with fury. "I've survived longer than any of you fools. You're just another meal waiting to happen." He advanced again, but Ethan was ready. With a roar, he charged forward, the rod held tightly in his hands. He slammed it into the man's chest, knocking the air from his lungs and sending him crashing into the wall. The man groaned but didn't give up. He fought like a cornered animal, refusing to die, refusing to accept the end. "Get down!" Ethan shouted as the man reached for his shotgun. There was no time to think. They couldn't afford another fight like this, not in these narrow, claustrophobic tunnels with the undead not far behind. With a desperate move, Ethan kicked the shotgun out of the man's hands, sending it skittering across the cold concrete floor. The man roared in frustration, lunging toward him with his knife again. But this time, Ethan wasn't alone. Maria and the others were on him in an instant, pushing him back, forcing him to the ground. In the struggle, the man's knife flew from his hand, and he was finally subdued. His breathing was heavy, his body shaking from exertion and fear. Ethan stood over him, panting, his chest heaving. For a moment, they all just stared at him, at the twisted, broken man who had once been like them, but had now lost everything that made him human. Ethan's mind raced, processing the danger they had just faced. They couldn't stay here any longer. The horde of zombies was getting closer, and there was no telling how much time they had left. The hospital had been a brief refuge, but it was now a distant memory. They had no choice but to keep moving. Ethan stepped back, his hands still trembling from the fight. "We can't stay here," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the chaos that had just unfolded. "We need to find a way out, and fast." Maria nodded, her face pale but determined. "What about him?" she asked, glancing down at the man they had just subdued. "He's not a threat anymore," Ethan said, his tone cold. "But we can't take him with us. He'll slow us down, and there's no telling what else he might do when he wakes up. We'll have to leave him here." It was a hard decision, but one that had to be made. The group was already on the edge, and they couldn't afford to waste time or energy on someone who had lost all sense of humanity. With one last glance at the man, they turned and moved deeper into the subway tunnels. The sound of their footsteps echoed through the passageway as they continued their journey through the dark. The air grew colder, the walls closing in on them as they moved farther away from the chaos above. Ethan's mind was still spinning from everything that had happened, the fight with the man, the growing horde of zombies outside, the looming uncertainty of their future. But through it all, one thing was clear. They had survived. Again. For now. They pressed on in silence, each of them lost in their own thoughts as they navigated the labyrinth of tunnels. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that something was lurking just out of sight, waiting for them to slip up. Every turn, every corner they rounded felt like a step closer to an inevitable confrontation. But they couldn't turn back. Not now. Hours passed, and their progress was slow. The tunnels twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the heart of the city's forgotten underground. The further they went, the more disorienting it became. It felt like they were walking through an endless maze, the walls closing in, the air growing thicker with each step. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they came upon a large, open space, a subway station, long abandoned. The train tracks lay in ruins, and the platform was covered in debris. It was eerily silent, save for the distant drip of water from a leaking pipe. But as they stepped onto the platform, Ethan felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. Something wasn't right. Suddenly, from the darkness at the far end of the station, a low growl echoed through the silence. Then, the unmistakable shuffle of feet. They weren't alone. The undead had found them again. The horde was closing in. And there was nowhere left to run.